We've got
Yeah, let's do
30.
it.
All right. Okay, great. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for being here today. My name is Christina, and I will be facilitating the Q&A portions of the webinar today. A quick overview of how that will work. In the toolbar at the bottom of your screen, you should see three options: Q&A, raise hand, and chat. If you're experiencing any technical issues, problems with your audio or something of that nature, please direct those questions to the chat feature and our IT specialist will assist you. We will not be using the raise hand feature, so please disregard that. We will have 3 brief stops for Q&A paced throughout Laura's presentation. While Laura is presenting, you're welcome to submit questions related to her presentation using the Q&A button. We won't be able to answer all of your questions, but we will do our best to pick out the questions that are arising most frequently for Laura to address live during those Q&A sections. We will have about 10 minutes, a 10-minute Q&A session at the end of the presentation to address any questions that still remain. A note that we are recording this webinar and we will be sending out the link to view it in a follow-up email. And with that, I'll hand it to Ivana to cover some information about Office of Sustainability Programs.
Hi there, everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening. Thanks for taking time out of your day. I hope everybody's staying cool. I just wanted to give a brief background about where this program is coming from before I pass things off to Laura. First of all, you're in for a treat of a workshop. Laura has been doing quite a bit of research on the state of recycling, and I think you're going to get a lot out of the workshop. So thanks for tuning in. Back one slide really quickly. The program is brought to you by the Office of Sustainability, which is a department at San Mateo County. And the goal of our office is to build a sustainable community that fills the needs of the present and the future. And we do that a number of ways. So go ahead and go to the next slide. We have a number of different programs. I'm just going to run through these pretty superficially. And you're welcome to visit our website to find out more. I just wanted to show everybody the breadth and depth of the resources and programs that our office has. We have programs about increasing the availability and the diversity of housing stock in our county. That's the Home for All program. We have an active transportation program that's helping people engage in more active forms of transportation, which is more necessary now during COVID. We also have an active transportation plan that's up online, and there's an open house that's available for your input now. The Climate Ready initiative is basically about reducing our emissions and preparing for the impacts of climate change. And so I encourage you to look at that project online as well. That's the Climate Action Plan is also open for public input, and we have some workshops coming up at the end of June. So check those out too. We have a green business program that helps small and medium businesses improve their environmental practices with a certification program. And then we have a number of different rebates, incentives through the Bay Area Regional Energy Network program that helps you save water, save energy, and reduce your bills at home for all different kinds of folks. If you're a multifamily property owner, a tenant, or a single family homeowner. In case you're not aware of Peninsula Clean Energy, it's an amazing program. It spun out of our office, and it brings cleaner energy to San Mateo County residents at a cheaper rate or less expensive cost than PG&E. And the last one that I direct you to, and I think most of you might be the most interested in, are the programs in our waste reduction area or theme in our office. We have a sustainability hotline. We have schools programs that support teachers and schools throughout the county. We have a community garden fund, and we have a 4Rs grants program that you can apply for funding. And so with that, I'll go into a bit more detail on the Sustainability Academy. This is the program that, that is bringing you this workshop. And it's basically a program that provides free education to raise awareness about complicated, complex social and environmental issues. We aim to empower residents to take agency in their lives and build community leadership through experiential education. Next slide. This is just a brief summary of the kinds of things that we do at the Sustainability Academy. All of this now is COVID contingent, but in the past we've had workshops on home composting. We continue to have these, but in a virtual form. Number of different themes, mending, we have a climate champion series coming up next month that you might be interested in. Registration is open. And we've done field trips in the past. Who knows what that will look like moving forward. But we have a lot of fun together. Go ahead to the next slide. One program I'll touch on briefly is a program that we just launched about a year and a half ago at the Maple Street Jail. We deliver holistic wellness and waste reduction workshops within the jail, and the pictures here are of our team working together with Planting Justice and some inmates, they're not pictured here, to plant an edible garden, edible forest at the jail. Go ahead to the next slide. Our Master Composter course is a 6-week long class, and it goes in depth on topics relating to composting. The class just finished not too long ago, and we'll offer it again this fall. So keep your eyes open for that. Next slide, please. And the last class that I'll highlight, and Laura actually teaches this class, is really fun. We've extended it to 9 weeks because people want to go in more depth and cover more topics. And we cover things from climate change to environmental justice to waste reduction and food systems. Registration is actually closed this year, so it's a teaser, so stay tuned and keep your eyes open for it next year. We had a lot of interest this year, so go ahead and go to the next slide. We have socials too. Obviously, these are on hold till who knows when. So go ahead and the next slide. This is just giving you a sense of who the Academy team is. Let's see, oh, Laura is on the next slide, but we have a number of folks that teach different workshops. Go ahead and, yeah, next slide. So with that, I'll introduce our presenter today. Laura McKaughan is an environmental consultant with 12 years of experience in planning and implementing recycling and zero waste projects. She founded Envirolutions in 2014. As I mentioned, she's our lead instructor for our Master in Local Sustainability course. And she's a board vice president for the California Resource Recovery Association and member of the Alameda County Recycling Board. So with that, I'll pass it off to Laura. And thanks again, everybody, for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you to Christina and Ivana for kicking it off. And I realized after looking at that last slide, I need an updated one with the new COVID-19 red hair color look that I'm donning these days of our indoor living. I'm so thrilled to be here this evening. I wanted to give you a bit of a snapshot of the way the presentation is structured this evening. So the first thing that we're going to be doing is we are going to be looking at, let's see if I can get that to go away. Oops, let me go back. I don't know if you guys can see it. There we go. Got that to go away. We're going to be looking at the programs that the waste haulers offer within San Mateo County as they existed pre-COVID, and then with some updates on any program changes or facility closures that might be in effect right now and when those things might open, when they might come back online. And then we're going to take a little bit more of a general look at some of the trends that we're seeing in the state of California, more regionally, and also internationally as well, looking at what kind of trends we are seeing with markets and how that's been affected at all, if by COVID. So this first slide just goes over who are the service providers in your waste shed. People have heard of watershed. This is your rather complicated landscape of who provides services throughout San Mateo County. And for this evening, I'm going to focus on those service providers and programs that are servicing the more populous areas. You can see here that Recology San Mateo County and the other two Recology entities probably have the the largest service area in San Mateo County, but you have a whole lot of other service providers, and I'll go through all of those programs. And I just wanted to point out here that there is a large swath marked as unincorporated San Mateo County, which is probably the more complicated service area that's serviced by Coons, Valley Trash, Republic Services also services in that area, as well as Green Waste. Because it's a lesser populated area, we're not going to be going extensively into those programs. But if my Cascadia team members can share on the chat, we're going to share what the interactive map that you can utilize online that really helps if you're confused about what your program would be. You can just scroll over your community and more actively see in real time who your service provider is if you're unfamiliar. And even if you are familiar with who your service provider is, it might be a very good link for you to find their website in short order rather than looking for a Google search. So that's a good resource that I want to share with you. So I'm going to start off with some just general good idea tips that this goes across all service areas and all programs. Breaking down your cardboard boxes sounds so simple, but it's probably one of the things that causes overflowing recycling bins more than anything else. And why is that a problem? Well, oftentimes waste haulers and recyclers cannot service your bins when they're overflowing. And because so many more of us are sheltering in place and generating a lot more discards in our home environment, whether that be in single family residential or in multifamily setting, it's super important that we utilize the capacity in the best way possible. So just breaking down your cardboard boxes is a real good, simple tip. Making sure your recycling is clean and dry and free of all food or liquid. Can't emphasize enough how important that is to effective recycling programs. If recycling is put in there half full of the refrigerator clean out that you just performed, we can't really recycle it in that state. So it does need to be free of any food or liquid. And what I always like to recommend is go ahead and put it in your sink while you're washing dishes naturally, or if you have a dishwasher, put it in your dishwasher while you're washing dishes naturally, and it will go ahead and clean it out and get it in the state that it needs to be in with recycling with pretty minimal water use. Paper takeout containers, a lot of folks think that because it's made from paper that these would be accepted in the recycling bin, and they're really too dirty to be accepted in the recycling bin. So pretty much across the board, we're not going to want you to put any paper food service items, your paper takeout clamshell, your Chinese food takeout, those types of packaging should, at best, depending on your community, go into the organics bin, but never in the recycling bin. And we'll talk a little bit more about the nuance of when some of those things should go into the trash, which is something that's changing. Soft film plastic is almost always garbage in a single stream recycling program or even a dual stream recycling program. So what do I mean by soft film recycling? That's anything that you can easily imagine being able to ball up into your hand. So think plastic bag, plastic film, plastic bubble wrap, saran wrap. That type of material is really hard to accept in a program that also accepts glass or that might accept other types of containers because it's going to get dirty. So there are good programs for that. Some of those are on hold right now, but grocery store take-backs for plastics, bags, and films mean that those plastic bags and films will see another life, probably turn right back into plastic bags and film. If you incur plastic bags and film, as you normally will, through maybe wrapped around your bread bag or wrapped around something that you bought at the store, we all get it sometimes. There are recycling programs for that. There are some within your communities, and I'll talk about those, but if there's other options for you, it's always better to try and separate those materials and recycle them in a place that's just taking plastic bags and film, like a grocery store take-back program. And then super duper important, if you can avoid it at all costs, please do not put your recycling inside of a plastic bag to collect it. There are a handful of programs in the Bay Area that actually allow you to do that. The problem with doing that is, especially if it's tied off in any way, almost all of our recycling goes over conveyor belts, and those are fast-moving conveyor belts, right? So if it's going down the conveyor belt line, mixed in with other materials, someone would have to be able to open that up, or we have technologies that might open that up. Much easier for us if the recycling is going in there loose or in an open top paper bag. So now some COVID-related recycling tips. Again, some general tips for you. PPE, face mask, gloves, anything used for personal protective equipment really doesn't belong anywhere else besides the trash. And they're really recommending to go ahead and put it in a tied off plastic bag when you put it in the trash. And then this is a big one. There are a lot of wet wipes that we're using more and more to disinfect our surrounding areas. And they are often marked very misleadingly, maybe as flushable, or I've even seen one that was marked as plumber approved. And I can guarantee that your wastewater treatment plant does not want them, even if somehow plumbers approve them. So that's always going to be a trash item. Please do not flush them, even if they say they're flushable or compostable or some other moniker like that. You may be asking, why could you say something like that if it's not true? And there's a high burden of proof for whether or not they can back up that claim, and they have not been held to task. So far it's a labeling issue that probably needs to be addressed at a statewide or national level. But until we get to that place where we can regulate against people being able to make those claims, it's important that we all act accordingly and keep those out of our wastewater treatment systems. All right, I'm going to launch right in with the first hauler that we're going to feature, and that is South San Francisco Scavenger. That is your service provider if you are in Brisbane, South San Francisco, or Millbrae. Their program is unique for the county in that they have dual stream recycling. That is, as you can see in the diagram below, a split bin. One side of it is for paper or fiber, right? Paper and cardboard. And the other side is for your containers. Why do they do that? Well, it turns out it's actually kind of a cool thing to have those things separated. It means that the recycling streams stay cleaner, so that glass and paper don't accidentally get commingled. But it's unique to the county, and so it's something for you to be aware of. If you have, because of this dual stream system, they acknowledge that you might wind up having more cardboard that can fit inside of the one half of the side of the recycling bin. And their instructions are just to flatten that cardboard out and place it next to your carts, preferably between two carts so it's not blowing down the street on your service day. Another thing that's unique to South San Francisco Scavenger is that they request, no compostable bags for the residential, RES is residential consumer. And the reason why they don't want the compostable bags, a lot of other programs, most of the other programs in the county allow compostable bags. Those are the compostable plastic bags, I should amend that. But they have a very unique processing for their organics that goes through an anaerobic digester first. That's a very fancy word for a program that encourages the organic material to break down so that methane is generated and can be harvested as a renewable natural gas, which they utilize to then run their fleet of vehicles. But because they have that unique processing, the compostable bags really disable the materials from within inside of it from breaking down, so that they can't get through the compostable bag to let the methane be generated and collected in a very safe way. So that's one unique program for them. And they are also one of the only haulers in the San Mateo County that want your paper milk cartons to go into the compost. Most of the other ones, I think all the other ones suggest that should go into the recycling cart instead. So how have things changed for South San Francisco? Their CRV buyback center that they operate at their facility in South San Francisco is currently closed. Also co-located there is what's called a household hazardous waste collection center. They're one of the county's authorized collection centers for these types of material. We're talking about e-waste, batteries, paint, other types of things that could be considered toxic in disposal. That facility is closed except for sharps is the term we utilize for needles. For those folks who are diabetic and need a needle drop off, that is still actually open for you to do, and I think you don't even have to get out of your cars for that. On-call cleanups, some people call it bulky item cleanups. This is that garage clean out, or the small construction project that you might have in your home, building something. That you are allowed to do twice a year. I have all the details for that. They have it also in their service guide. So when you get the service guides that we'll share with you, you can easily look up what the details are. But these are free programs. And actually all the haulers in your area in San Mateo County offer free bulky item collection programs for you. And they're all up and running. So we encourage you to take advantage of that and call to schedule that first. Call before you start that project and you've got all this extra stuff and you don't know what to do with it. That way we can avoid the temptation to stockpile things on our street corners with a free sign in the hopes that somebody might collect it. I think it's even less likely now than before that somebody would be interested in those materials just due to safety concerns. If you're looking for more information about their COVID-related announcements, there's their website. Recology in San Mateo County, there's the three entities. There's Recology San Mateo County that has the largest service area, and then Recology San Bruno for San Bruno. Recology of the Coast services Pacifica, Moss Beach, Montera, and El Granada. So the larger or smaller service area for those. The programs in San Mateo County for Recology are all pretty similar. Same kind of thing where they accept plastics containers 1 through 7 as long as they're marked 1 through 7. And the only unique stipulation to their recycling program is that they cannot accept plastic that is black plastic. Okay, so why is that? Again, it's just their technologies that they have. They have an optical sorter at their Shoreway Environmental Center where they process all the recycling that they handle. And the optical sorter can't see through black. So that's the reason why they don't accept black plastic in their recycling program. I would say in general, black plastic is a problematic material for all the haulers. And we'll kind of talk a little bit later about what some of the challenging materials are to handle. But in general, black plastic is not particularly recyclable. Another, not a unique thing, but one thing in my interviews with Recology San Mateo that they wanted me to emphasize was that polylined paper cups are garbage. Okay, so we're talking about a disposable paper cup from your takeout from Starbucks. When you look inside of that cup, if it looks shiny, that's a poly liner. It's a polyethylene liner. You're basically drinking plastic. All right, so something to think about when you're pouring hot liquids into that cup. Aside from that, though, some haulers still say that they want those paper cups in the compost. Most in San Mateo County still say that. However, we are acknowledging as an industry that this is a problematic material because there is a very thin plastic liner that is going to the compost facilities. And because of the amount of paper coffee cups that are being disposed of in the compost, it really has become an issue. And it might be something that we see that changes bins soon. Certainly I think all of the program areas would suggest that if this is a material that has a heavy poly liner or certainly had a poly liner and was shiny on both sides of the packaging, then that should definitely go into the trash. Things that might have changed in Recology San Mateo County's service area is that for a while, the Shoreway Environmental Center was closed, but actually reopened on May 4th. So that's good news for those of you who may have experienced that closure during the early days of shelter in place. Also, and a really cool program that's still up and running is that there are free compost for residents of San Mateo County. You can get up to 2 50-pound bags. You got to shovel yourself. But I heard from the representatives at Rethink Waste that this is a very popular program right now because, again, some folks have some time on their hands to do these types of backyard projects. So if you find yourself in that situation, take advantage and go get yourself some free compost. The Public Recycling Center at Shoreway Environmental is still closed. And they used to manage a buyback program. So the recycling center is an area where you can come drop off your recycling, but there's no CRV that you would get back for it. So that 5 or 10 cents deposit that you pay on a bottle or can that's part of the CRV program. A buyback center gives that money back to you. A drop-off center doesn't give you any money, but you can certainly get rid of your materials for free. So neither one of those are open right now, but the public recycling center should be opening soon after shelter in place is lifted. Republic Services, another service provider in your area. Republic Services operates in, and I forgot to write it down on my list, but 3 different service areas: Daly City, Daly City, I'm going to forget it, nope. All right, I think Monica's on the call. She can help you with the service areas, but hopefully you know which ones you are. And they offer the single stream recycling program, which means, unlike South City Scavenger, where they want you to do dual stream, single stream just means bottles, cans, paper, and cardboard all together. So that's very typical of the rest of the county. Also, Republic Services does allow you to use the compostable bag liner, as does Recology San Mateo. And then Republic Services was the only waste hauler that I spoke to that wants the aseptic containers and gable-top milk containers in the recycling cart. What are those? Aseptic is like a juice box or a soy milk box. Increasingly, we're seeing chicken stock come in a flat box. If you look on the bottom, it'll say aseptic, most likely, and then Tetra Pak is often the name of the brand. That is a problematic material in the county. Most programs consider that a trash item. However, it is becoming an increasing material packaging that we're seeing in our recycling stream. And so some facilities are trying to navigate in towards collection of that so that they can help find markets for it and get that recycled. So Republic Services is one of those. Gable-top milk containers are that paper milk container. They are accepted in the recycling bin for Republic Services. And Republic Services postponed their bulky item collection. Again, that's that garage sale clean out, but it's back up and running. They just wanted me to encourage, again, please no personal protective equipment in your recycling bin. And it's so important, no overflowing recycling carts right now. And they're updating their online resources guide, which should be back online very soon. Green Waste is one of the last haulers that I'll feature on this program. They are the service provider for Woodside and Portola Valley. Their residential green cart program is only for yard waste, and in the service guides, you'll see their programs for multifamily and single family, which differ a little bit. And I think I failed to mention that the unincorporated areas for San Mateo County, so that lesser populated center region, does not yet have an organics program for either yard waste or food waste. So if you are living in one of the smaller communities in that area, you may not have any access to organics programs at this point. I am going to break for questions and turn it over to Christina.
Okay, so we've got a couple good questions coming in. Let's see, the first one. So someone asked, some soft plastic packaging and bags have the recycling symbol on them. So that's quite confusing. Can those be recycled?
So the answer is it depends. And again, back to that labeling issue, there is no restrictions around them being able to put that recycling symbol on there because theoretically the bag could be recycled somewhere. So if there is a program somewhere for that plastic bag and film, then the packaging manufacturer can say that it's recyclable, even if it's not recyclable in your curbside program. This is something that we're trying to address on the statewide level with new regulations prohibiting the use of the recycling symbol unless it was recyclable in certain number, certain percentage of curbside programs, but we're not yet there. So unfortunately, that means that the onus of knowing whether or not it's recycling falls to you as the consumer and for you to be aware of the programs in your area. I'll just say that the only hauler in your service area that allows for plastic bags to go into your recycling cart is Republic Services. And I'm not even sure if that's in all 3 of their service areas, but the only way that they would allow it is if you do what we call the Bag of Bags program. And that means consolidating all of your clear plastic bags inside of one bag, not so big, and tying it off. So that's plastic bags, produce bags, the t-shirt bags from a grocery store, and it would not include certain heavy-duty plastics, agricultural film, that kind of stuff. But saran wraps, plastic bags for bread, produce bags, those types of things could be included in the Bag of Bags program. Again, plug for taking it back to the grocery store, much more likely to get recycled than if you put it in a single-stream recycling bin.
Great. Okay. And then we had a question about styrofoam, and you know, while that should always go in the trash, not recycling, some haulers accept large blocks or sheets of styrofoam at transfer stations. Do any haulers in this area accept that at this time?
Not that I am aware of, but I don't know if Shoreway does. If anybody did, I think it would only be Shoreway Environmental Center, but I did not hear that from them. So to my knowledge, no, I don't believe so, and it's not a part of any of the collection programs for your curbside collection. So I guess my best advice to that caller would be to go ahead and check out Shoreway's website, and if it doesn't say so on the website, give them a call just to ask before heading down there.
Okay. And then a clarification question on aseptic containers in Republic territory. Does that include the ones that look like they sort of have a foil lining on the inside? It does.
So aseptic containers do have the foil lining. Some of the other containers that we think about are like the gable top milk containers that have that waxy on the outside. If you look inside, there's no aluminum. Aseptic specifically does include aluminum on the inside. And so when I say that, that's the packaging that I'm talking about. So yes, it does include that in that collection program.
Great, okay. And a good question about aluminum foil. If there's food debris stuck on that, does it have to be fully cleaned off before it's recycled? And what happens to that foil that gets thrown into the recycling that is actually dirty?
Great question. So with tin foil, what we recommend is to clean it as best you can. You know, if you've got the burrito, take the napkin afterwards, just wipe it down, remove all the food that you can. A little bit of oils and greases are not going to be a problem for the recycling system if you ball it up. Okay, so what we would like you to do is ball it up with the outside being relatively clean and dry. Any residual sauces or anything like that on the inside so that it's not going to get the paper dirty. Any food remnants on the aluminum foil aren't a problem for the recycling process because the recycling to make aluminum back into sheets again, obviously is very, very hot. So it cooks that food right off. But the problem with putting dirty aluminum foil into a recycling bin is that if there's any paper in the recycling, which there will be, especially even if there's not in your bin, but the truck's going to be collecting all the recycling bins on your road, then the paper will get dirty. And once paper is dirty or wet, it's not a good candidate to get recycled. So the reason why it's so important to keep everything in the recycling bin clean and dry is to make sure that we can actually recycle the paper.
Great. Okay, we've got actually several questions coming in about how to properly dispose of e-waste, household hazardous waste, bulky items, light bulbs, things like that. And I'm not sure if we're getting to that later, but just got a couple questions coming in around those materials.
Sure, I'll go ahead and address them now. So if you had a curbside program in your area that allowed you to put batteries out on your recycling day, that program is still up and running. I was going to hit that later, but might as well just mention it now. So the good news is if there's a curbside program for your batteries or some curbside programs for batteries also allow you to put in old cell phones, small things like that, that program is still up and running. Let me emphasize one thing on batteries. Lithium batteries are super problematic for us. You do need to put tape over lithium batteries to make sure they're not dangerous in the recycling process, and never, ever, ever put them loose into a recycling bin or any batteries for that matter. So if your community had a program where you could do curbside collection of motor oil or cooking oil or batteries, those programs are still up as far as I'm aware from the conversations that I had with the haulers. If your community doesn't have one of those programs, the household hazardous waste facilities in San Mateo County are currently closed. And it looks as though it will be until after shelter in place is lifted for those facilities to reopen again. So our advice to you would be to go ahead and hang on to those things. I know you want to get that clean out done. They're asking that you would hang on to those things until after shelter in place is lifted.
Okay, and does that go for furniture, for bulky item as well?
Bulky item, if your bulky item collection program includes e-waste, then you might be able to get your e-waste taken out with that. But as far as I know, all the haulers in San Mateo County are back on with bulky item collection. Now, process for scheduling that is a little bit different, but in general, start with a call to customer service first thing to learn about how many bags you can put out, how many large items you can put out, what materials are accepted and are not accepted, and that will vary a little bit community to community. But for the bulky item collection, which would include your broken furniture, those programs are still on.
Great. Okay. We've got a couple more questions coming in, but I do believe that you are going to address all of these in the upcoming section, so I'll hand it back over to you.
All right. So now a little bit more general information about how COVID-19 has affected processing both within the county and beyond. We will admit that some recycling processing went down temporarily in the states, within the state of California. And part of the reason why the haulers that said that they needed to do that did so was to revamp their facilities to accommodate social distancing. They might have had workers working too close in proximity previously, so they needed time to figure out a way that they could do the same amount of work where you created enough distance between employees. And then also there was dramatic reductions in volumes that the haulers were seeing. I think that with all of us sheltering in place, we feel like trash is up, because we see everything that we discard now. We're not doing any of that in our workplace or in a restaurant. But the reality of the situation is when the commercial entities went down, haulers have been reporting a significant financial losses due to this. And some are reporting somewhere between 40 to 100% of revenues cut because of their blend of residential to commercials. They had a lot of commercial businesses in their service area. This is going to be a huge hit to them, which also meant more worker layoffs. And that was one way, in fact, they were actually able to accommodate social distancing, was because they just had fewer workers. They didn't need as many shifts. So that's some of the differences we're seeing. I wouldn't have anticipated initially that we would have seen a cut to jobs in the waste and recycling sector, because it's considered an essential service. But when you think about how much things have shifted and how many businesses are closed currently, it does make a lot of sense. And then there's been some waste prevention ordinances and other policies that we have on both the statewide level and more locally that have been put on hold for now, and I'll go into those in a little bit more detail. Of all the haulers that I spoke to, though, I'm still being told that that we are still able to move these recycled commodities, both internationally and domestic, for those markets that exist. So I initially thought that I would be hearing a slightly different story, but the good news is they're still able to market those recyclables. And I wanted to take a step back just because I know many of you have heard about this term national sword or green fence. It's not the focus of today's presentation, but we would be remiss not to at least address it because, as you all probably heard, January 2018, China stopped any and all imports of paper and plastic that came from California. It was very abrupt. It was a change that we saw coming, but when from the time they made the announcement, there was only about a 6-month window for that change to be implemented. And up until that point, 62% of California's exports of paper and plastic, all different grades, went to China. And so you might imagine that was a huge hit for the industry. The good news is that in some ways the industry has bounced back in many cases. There are new markets that have developed. A lot of those materials are now going to Indonesia or to Vietnam, Cambodia. I know many of you may have seen the story of plastics. I know I recently did, and there are obviously issues with the export of recycling to those countries and to China, and that's the reason why this move happened in the first place. China really wanted to stop being the world's trash can. But from the COVID perspective, the good news is that we haven't seen a market decrease in the amount of recyclables that we're able to ship internationally due to this. I'm going to take a quick step. Now, that said, it is important for us to make sure that the recyclable plastics that we put into our recycling bin are actually recyclable and not garbage, because that stuff that is not recyclable that goes internationally will wind up likely being incinerated and not recycled and creating an issue for the communities. Excuse me. What are their effects? So talking about policies, SB 1383, many of you may have heard about this. This is the policy around short-lived climate pollutants. This is a bill that was passed in September of 2016, which stipulates that we have to reduce our organics that goes to landfills to a 2014 level, 50% of a 2014 level. Let me say that again. So we have to reduce the organics that are sent to landfill by 50% by the year 2020 and by 75% by the year 2025. And that is from a baseline level of the generation in 2014. So it's not current generation. This has some upcoming regulation deadlines, and I'll share with you that on the next slide. But even if the regulations are finalized on the same timeline that they imagine now, it's likely that the implementation will be postponed. And that's largely due to the fact that all of the things that we're talking about when we're looking about edible food reduction, right? So no more throwing away food. When we're talking about setting up organics programs in communities that are underserved, these all take money. And at this point, it's a difficult sell to ask ratepayers to pay more money in this exact moment. So as much as we want to push forward with implementing mandatory organics recycling throughout the state and through every county in the state, there are some real financial reasons why some of these things might be a little bit slower in implementation. Everybody knows the AB 2020. This is often called the bottle bill for short. There's right now, as many of you know, a lack of access to buyback centers throughout the state. There's currently only one buyback center in all of San Mateo County. It's J&D Recycling. And so that's one buyback center for a service area of over 700,000 citizens. So that's not enough coverage. And so because this is a bill that should enable all of us to get our deposit back, we are out of compliance with AB 2020 currently. Just kind of how that works, a real quick primer on the bottle bill. When you go to the store, you'll often see it as a separate line item on your receipt, and it'll say CRV for the containers that are included in the bottle bill program. It's 5 or 10 cents per container. It is not a tax, it is a deposit. And you, as the person who paid that deposit, have every right to get that money back. And buyback centers are where we get some of our cleanest and best recycling from. So they're a critical part of our infrastructure throughout the state. And I'll talk a little bit more about those in a second. You'll be happy to know that the county's polystyrene or styrofoam, which is the brand name for it, there's still a ban in the county on styrofoam. So that's still in place. Somebody asked before about styrofoam. Styrofoam is banned as a food service item. I think it should be for all takeouts throughout the county. There are small differences city to city, but any place that had a styrofoam ban before still has a styrofoam ban, and it's pretty much countywide. And many of you heard about Gavin Newsom's executive order N2520. This is something that affects buyback centers and also the plastic bag ban that we had previously in the state leading up to COVID-19. And then last but not least, there is new guidance that I just added to the slides today, as I heard about it yesterday, about CDC's recommendations for food service for dine-in restaurants as they start looking into phase 2 of allowing people to start dining inside the restaurant again instead of only requiring takeout. So taking each of these items one by one, just wanted to show you, I talked about those upcoming compliance dates for SB 1383. You could see here, July 1st, 2020 is right around the corner in the grand scheme of things. And that's the date by which we should all of the communities throughout California should have our plan in place for how we are going to be able to meet those compliance thresholds of 50% waste reduction by the year 2020, organics waste reduction to landfill by the year 2020. Or, sorry, am I saying that right? Yeah, 50% by 2020, which we're already there, and 75% by 2025. So what do those thresholds mean? We used to be at a 50% recycling rate throughout the state after 939. Unfortunately, in past years, we've actually rolled backwards. Some of that's due to new construction that was on hold during the recessions of the past, but a lot of that has to do with prosperity. We're just making more money and we're generating more, we're building more buildings, and that results in more complicated waste. And in San Mateo County, we actually rolled backwards to, I believe the last I saw, 42% recycling rate. So we are not even at that 50% recycling rate at this point. So we have to get back to that place, and then we will move forward with the next phase, which is the 75% waste reduction. But we have to even get back to where many counties and cities were a few years ago. And then you can see that we, by January 1, 2022, that's when the enforcement and penalties, which will be significant. So again, we may see that some of these implementation dates get rolled back just due to some of the significant costs that will be associated with this. I want to then talk about the lack of access to buyback centers and some of the really unique and unintended consequences that I learned about during this process. I heard recently from the Container Recycling Institute, who studies recyclable packaging, and what happens with this, that the closure of buyback centers had a significant impact immediately on the recycled feedstock that was available for glass and aluminum. Okay, so let's take those one by one. Glass, up to 25% of the glass that we put in our single stream recycling programs may not be getting recycled because it just comes in too dirty. So how do we get recycled content glass into our new bottles? It's through buyback centers, right? That's through the CRV program that enables us to have a significant feedstock. And in the weeks after shelter in place happened, there was a reduction of 60 to 70% drop off in the early days of the shutdown in the amount of glass that they were receiving. So now these manufacturers that were tooled towards using a recycled feedstock to make new bottles had to move towards virgin feedstock, right? Unintended consequences of closing down buyback centers. I wouldn't have thought of that myself, but that's what happens. Those manufacturers needed that feedstock, and they had to pivot right away to going towards virgin feedstock. Same story with aluminum. Aluminum, 20% of the recycled feedstock, or 20% of the feedstock typically in our cans comes from recycled content. And that kind of went away right away when the buyback centers closing. One of the interesting other things that I learned was that there was not the subsequent uptick in the number of recyclable containers, especially those in the CRV program, in your curbside programs. So we think that people are probably stockpiling their recycling. Again, this is a major source of money for homeless people and low-income people. They relied on that money to help pay their bills. And we suspect that many of them are holding on to that and waiting for these buyback centers to close. So what we might see is a spike in redemption immediately after shelter in place or when the buyback centers finally reopen, which, by the way, they're not required to stay closed at this point, right? The executive order simply indicates that their hours, that they do not have to maintain a standard number of hours of operation, right? So the bottle bill stipulates that they have to be open a certain number of hours a day. And this now says they don't have to be, which means for some of them, they decided not to be open at all. Some have decided to stay open. So there's nothing in the ordinance that requires that buyback centers be closed. And then I'll just say that beverage containers are down overall due to that lack of commercial generation. That's where the majority of the bottles and cans were coming from, even though we think they're coming from us. It's really coming from the hotels and restaurants, none of which are open right now. So for the buyback centers that have remained open, this is a lot of what you see. And this is not what we would want to see. We want to see more facilities that can handle this, less long lines, less hundreds of people congregating, just trying to get their redemption money back. I wanted to just briefly address something that I've seen come up from several different sources. I know we in the industry have been talking about it. There was a study from the New England Journal of Medicine indicating that the virus could potentially live on recycled commodities, maybe up to 24 hours on fiber, which is paper and cardboard, and maybe up to 3 days on other containers like metals and plastics. Looking more closely at that study, it became clear that that was in a very controlled environment with a viral load that was significant. And there's been subsequent reporting that seems to be indicating that there's very little, if any, exposure to the virus from the recycling process, as long as the quintessential components of our COVID response are maintained. Social distancing of the workers, proper personal protective equipment, maintaining 6 foot of distance. So I feel like we will see more buyback centers changing and pivoting and starting to reopen as long as they feel like they can implement those safety precautions. And the good news is that recycling facilities throughout the states have maintained their doors open, and all of the haulers that I spoke to wanted me to emphasize that those safety precautions are being adhered to within their facilities. Going to the issue of the plastic bags, I know we were all very bummed that there was a rollback in the implementation of the plastic bag ban, but I wanted to clarify a little bit of what this actually means and what it doesn't mean. The statewide executive order simply stipulates that we do not have to enforce the plastic bag ban at this point. Okay, so I'll say that again. We don't have to, communities, counties don't have to ban plastic bags at this point. Grocery stores are able to again use them. They were not before COVID happened. It does not, however, ban reusable bags, okay? Now, you might be saying, well, I think I can't use it at my grocery store. And that is because the 7 Bay Area counties went further than what the state had suggested and implemented a reusable bag ban that stipulates that you cannot bring your bags in to the store for reuse. That said, hot off the press, this afternoon, I learned that Alameda County has now softened their regulations and are no longer explicitly restricting the use of reusable bags. So up until that point, all 7 Bay Area counties had been on the exact same page with the restrictions that they have in place. This is one difference that now Alameda County has from the other 7 Bay Area counties, which includes San Mateo County, of course. And so let's hope that some of the other Bay Area counties will follow suit and will soften their restrictions around reusable plastic bags. You can see here that there are a number of other really great recommendations from the CDC on how to keep things safe. And many of you have seen these in your grocery stores. They're sanitizing the carts. They're doing so much on that end that if you kept your reusable bag in your cart, there really shouldn't be any reason why that's not an acceptable behavior. So I think we'll see that one change soon as well. And then I just wanted to share one more little tidbit of something else that I learned, unintended consequences, right? So lower local breweries were particularly hard hit, and I learned it's because of the way that they market their beer. They tend to be small batch craft. They tend to sell to restaurants and hotels. And overnight, after shelter-in-place happened, many local breweries found themselves facing a very difficult decision of whether or not they were having to discard of all their beer. They couldn't move it. They certainly couldn't sell anything in a keg anymore. And many of them pivoted to cans and are now trying to move materials that way. So if you feel like you want to support a local business that was very heavily affected by that, you know, that's one way. But I mean, it's just one of those things you never really think about all the consequences. Here is a great packaging choice, a reusable packaging choice, a great system for getting large amounts of their product to market. And they had to pivot and move into just single-use disposable bottles and cans. Meanwhile, bottled water and other bottled beverages saw a spike in their purchasing or people purchasing their products. And that was largely due to pantry loading. You might be interested in knowing that's an industry term. That's the idea of everybody going out in the beginning of the first week, I would say, of shelter in place and loading up on things that maybe we don't even need, like bottled water. So, you know, just a plug here, I'm sure most of us on this call are not stocking up on water bottles. The tap water is still fine. So there's no real reason to make that move. And then this is, again, something that was late breaking news, article in Politico that shares that the CDC is coming out with recommendations for, again, phase 2 when restaurants begin to start reopening. And it specifically states that for shared tools, that's the language that they're using, that disposables be a first option. However, the language is a little bit complicated in that it says if that is not feasible or desirable, that you could use reusables in dine-in establishments as long as there were appropriate dishwashing stations, which they had anyhow. They're all being regulated by county safety already. So if they were serving on reusable food service where before, it can really come down to a restaurant by restaurant preference for whether or not they make the shift to reusables or to disposables. We have a break for questions, and it's 7 o'clock, so maybe we can make this one relatively short so I can make sure to get through all the solutions before we wrap.
Okay, great. Yeah, we've got some good questions coming in. We've got one question about textiles and clothes. Do we have any good ideas for how to properly dispose of those?
That would be something else that I would suggest that you hold on to until after clothing donation is a possibility again. At this point, Goodwill is still closed. We're not seeing, I don't think that we've seen a lot of advice to suggest that textiles are holding on to the virus very long. So I think as we begin to see that soften, we'll start seeing textile recycling programs come back online, again, with those same safety precautions in place. That's the hope. But right now, not a lot of options for you.
Okay, and how about the best way to dispose of propane bottles?
Propane bottles, those are very difficult. I would take them to your household hazardous waste facility. And there is actually a new product, I believe it's at REI. It's Refuel Your Fun is the name of the campaign. And it is a refillable propane, the small propane tank. So that's the best option if you find yourself in the market to buy a new one. The way that program works is that you bring it back in, much like your soda stream. If you take that into your Kohl or Ace Hardware, you drop off the empty and they give you a full one and you basically replace it. It's not as if they fill it like they would a larger propane tank. But that's a good option moving forward. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of good options for propane tanks. Majorly important, even though it's made of metal and metal is recyclable, please don't put it in a recycling bin. A lot of what goes into the recycling bin is compacted, and compacted propane is under pressure and has caused fires at many facilities, some of which are in San Mateo County. So we encourage you to take care of that responsibly, and please don't put it in your recycling bin.
Okay, and this is an interesting question. This might be something that you recommend that we hang on to until this is all kind of over, but a mass amount of bubble wrap, like several trash cans worth, what should we do with that?
For a residential consumer, I don't think you really have any good options other than throwing it in the trash can. You can call Shoreway Environmental Center, that services all of San Mateo County, and see if they're interested in taking it off your hands. Typically, even if it seems like a lot for a residential entity, it may not register on the radar screen for a lot for a facility. So it depends on how they want to handle it, but they may allow you to do a drop-off. So it's worthy of a call. But again, Shoreway, their public area drop-off is reopened. Their recycling side of it is not yet. So call them first before you do anything. All of this is so changing in the moment that, you know, you're going to want to double check before you head down there for really any kind of recycling or disposal.
Okay, great. And it's after 7. In the interest of time, do you want to move forward and get to some of these questions later?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully, if I can breeze through some of this, we should still have about 15 minutes for the last questions. So I wanted to end on what some solutions, some suggestions would be for moving forward. I still would encourage you to prioritize reusables, to keep making your desire to use reusables known to the places that you shop, because they need to hear from you that that's a priority. I have 3 different grocery stores that I split my shopping up into now, and they all allow me to put my stuff back in my backpack or in my reusable bag. And so there are those places out there, and they are the ones that should get your business. Buying in bulk might be a little bit harder right now. I know some things aren't available and other things they're kind of packaging for you, but whenever you can, that's just a really good option to continue to do. Shopping for recyclability, this goes further than just avoiding plastic. I think plastic has been painted with a brush that it's the evil, and for good reason. There are a lot of problems with plastics, but there are also other problem materials out there. And so just moving away from plastic doesn't mean that we've actually invested in a packaging that's more recyclable. For instance, a lot of cosmetic glass, colored glass, deeply clouded glass, red glass, blue glass. There's no way to recycle that, right? There's no market for it. When we recycle glass, we have to put it with all the colors that are like it, all the green with the green, all the brown with the brown, all the clear with the clear. So if you're thinking about that in advance, and you come across your favorite new vodka company that's putting their stuff in red glass, or your favorite cosmetic shampoo that now has a ink injected polyethylene tetraphthalate, the PET plastic, right? The number 1 plastics, we think of that as being the most recyclable there is. Not if it's ink ingested. So if you can't see through it, and even if it says it's the number 1, very hard for us to recycle. So I would recommend shopping, if you have to get stuff in plastics, shopping in number 1s or 2 plastics. If packaging could be that, that's the best. And clear or cloudy in the case of number 2s, like a milk jug. If at all possible, keep things simple, buy in larger quantities. Don't get the small single-use yogurts and things like that. And then, and we already talked about continue to use reusable bags. Avoid the pantry loading. Avoid wish cycling, and I wanted to get to this when I'm talking about some of those different cosmetic products. I've got a couple of them featured down below. I know that one of my favorite companies, my friend actually started it. When she first started, she put a lot of her beautiful creams and moisturizers into a blue glass. And it was just a simple conversation with her. Granted, she was my friend, but if you have a relationship, and you don't have to have a relationship. You can just get online to their feedback on their website. Send them a quick note. If they hear from 1 or 2 of us or 10 of us that we would prefer their stuff to be in actually recyclable packaging, they might make that shift. She did. She was able to move from the blue glass right to a clear glass. Now I feel good about putting it into a recycling bin, right? And avoid wish cycling, right? So if it's not in recyclable packaging, if it's in plastic and it doesn't have any number, like chasing arrows with a number, that should not go in the recycling bin. If it doesn't have a number, then the recyclers cannot sort it into its own polymer type. It has to have a number in order for them to be able to recycle it. So if it doesn't have a number, it's garbage. And you got to put it there, because otherwise we're running the risk of shipping these non-recyclable plastics to developing countries where they're going to then have to deal with our problems, right? So know the programs, avoid wish cycling, and encourage your favorite products to maybe change their packaging to be more recyclable. Check in your area for bulky item pickup. Talked about that before. Just make sure you know that it's going on and what the restrictions are before you start hauling that stuff out to the curb. Advocate for buyback centers. Whether or not you take your material to buyback centers, hopefully I made the case tonight that we need them. We need them for the recycling process to happen. So we need the ones that were closed to reopen, and we need way more. We need way more. We need them to be within the convenience zone. Part of the bottle bill actually stipulates that there should be a place to redeem your bottle and can within a quarter mile of where you purchased it. And we are wildly out of compliance with that. So we need to get back to that as well. Again, hang on to your household hazardous waste until after shelter in place, and encourage your community/county to make organics and food scrap recycling mandatory. We heard about SB 1383. It's coming somewhat soon, but it might be a few years down the line. And there are a lot of areas within San Mateo County that don't have don't have access to organics collection programs, and even more, that don't have access to food scraps recycling programs. Okay, so that's the green cart that will allow the yard waste and the food waste. So, you know, I know that it is not mandatory yet in San Mateo County. Every hauler that I spoke to says if you are in a multifamily, like an apartment building, and you want that program, talk to your property manager. Talk to them about your desire to get it. They will have to pay more because it does cost more to run that program. But if it's something that the residents are interested in, many times the property manager will listen, and they would be more than happy to work with you on rolling out the program with free resources, posters, brochures, helping you out, maybe even with the compost collection pails. So if there are any of you out there that are living in multifamily in San Mateo County, bring it up to your property manager, your landlord, and see what they say. Couple other quick solutions to recommend. We need to push for more bans on problematic materials throughout the state, and then also federally. A lot of folks don't know that there is no federal recycling program. There is no federal law requiring commercial entities to recycle, and that's a real shame. We have states right around us in California that are absolutely pitiful at recycling, and I think you all know that, but a lot of that would change if we actually were able to push for a federal recycling program. And I know Californians Against Waste was working on something like that. I don't think it's going to get anywhere this year, but it may be something that we see soon. And when you hear about it, stand up and support it. We need to invest in domestic infrastructure. We have some burgeoning infrastructure that is being subsidized and promoted by CalRecycle for plastics number 1 and 2, which means that we may even have manufacturing within the state of California. You know, unheard of, actually bringing blue-collar jobs back. We need to do more of that, and we especially need to do that for 3 through 7 plastics. And we didn't talk about this earlier, but I talked about, you know, the national sword and some of the challenges that came from that. And we are back to being able to move materials at the same level that we were before. But really problematic materials at this point are plastics 3 through 7. Okay, so all of the haulers that I spoke with said they're having a hard time if being able to move those materials at all. And so we want to make sure that we can find that market again, so we get those materials, again, recycled, sorted, but it would be more strengthened if it was done here within the United States. And so way more than anything else that I've mentioned when we're looking at what would make a recycling system work is going upstream. We've got to start looking at the product manufacturers and stipulating restrictions on what kind of packaging they can use, what kind of plastics they can use, and they need to design for recyclability. And this is a concept called extended producer responsibility. Many of you have heard of it before. There's been within the industry some back and forth around what this should look like and what an effective EPR program would be. It has to, in my opinion, include a lot of government oversight. It can't just be the fox guarding the hen house, right? We can't just have Coca-Cola, Nestle, and Pepsi deciding how best to set up programs that actually result in their materials having more recycled content. But they do have to be at the table. So it has to be the producers, the corporations at the table with governments, with a lot of government oversight to make sure that the programs that they build are actually effective, and that we put real restrictions on the types of plastics that can be used, on the types of mixed materials that can be used, no more of these triple layer things, because until we do that, we will be downstream trying to figure out, or trying to pull out the bodies instead of walking upstream to see who's throwing them in. Last slide, I think, here before I turn it over to some questions and a poll for you. Other solutions that have come around, especially around the COVID time, less exposure to the recycling workers at redemption centers. There's the idea of touch-free redemption. They're called reverse vending machines. So you kind of put the bottles and cans in there, and it gives you a little ticket that you can then go and use to buy more groceries. Also, there's the concept of mobile buyback centers, which is getting some traction. That would help us to meet the need for convenience zone recycling by having trucks go out to multiple locations at a set time and date over the course of a week, so that those underserved areas, those areas that could really use a buyback center, have access to one. And then we just need to re-look at the bottle bill. The bottle bill, as many of you know, has not all packaging in it. Wine bottles, oddly, are not in it. Spirit bottles, also not in it. So we need to add more of that packaging in there. We should look at getting paper into some kind of extended producer responsibility or advanced disposal fee situation where we're actually paying to subsidize the process of recycling paper. Because otherwise, paper is just a hard thing to recycle right now. We don't have a lot of paper mills in the United States. We have to ship this internationally. And so if we created an incentive through some kind of program like the CRV program for paper packaging, we might actually see it being more recycled. And last but not least, providing more support for our recyclers out there. They've always operated on super thin, razor thin margins, and all of this couldn't come at a worse time. So through the bottle bill, we need to make sure that we're making them whole and not expecting them to take what was previously trash and turn it into money, right? When we discarded all these materials in a trash can, we paid for it. Now that it moved to the blue bin, we expect that somehow it's going to cover all the costs itself. And it's just not the case. It takes money to do this. And we need to acknowledge that and not expect them to make all their money off of some redemption value or some market value. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to questions after I think we're going to do a quick poll.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so we've got a really good question here. Do we know why only 20% of aluminum is made from recycled content?
So for aluminum, my understanding is that the capture rate for all aluminum cans nationally is around 60%. And that's actually the highest of all of the commodities. So you might say, well, that doesn't seem like it's very high at all. And certainly in California, that's not the case. We're much higher, or above 80% for aluminum, but we have to factor in the rest of the country. And there are not a lot of recycling programs in most of the country. One of the things that makes the biggest difference in whether or not there is effective recycling programs is having a bottle bill. And there are only 10 states out of 50 that have one. And so in those states, we see really high recycling rates. And in the other 40 states, we see pitiful recycling rates. I mean, the difference is night and day. It can be like, you know, Arizona, where I'm originally from, it's somewhere in the teens is what the recycling rate is, right? It's crazy, the difference. and I could see a follow-up question would be, why doesn't everybody have a bottle bill? They're not very popular with packaging manufacturers. And so, as you might imagine, the answer is money. They would have to pay a small amount into the program in order to keep it afloat. And by a small amount, we're talking pennies per container. But in every state where a bottle bill has been introduced and promoted, they have fought it, and they're pretty successful. And some states they've won. In other states they've won, or they're at least attempting to roll back the existing bottle bill. So it's very nefarious, but it's a long answer to that question.
Great. Okay. And this is a good question that's pretty timely right now. How about insulated packaging and bags from like food delivery programs?
So I'm going to guess, I guess I'll kind of answer that in a couple different ways. I'm not sure if you're talking about the envelopes, like the Amazon might ship, that might be plastic on the outside, or might be paper on the outside. I'm not sure if that's the packaging. Typically that's a trash item. And then there's also the other thing I know about food delivery is that they come with those little ice pack things. I've seen some go so far as to say that they are recyclable and compostable, which is basically not possible. Those would at best be reusable, and certainly reuse them if you can. And if you'd have to discard them, definitely throw them in the trash can. I'm hoping that I answered that question. Okay.
Great. Okay. And then this one I think is really important. A lot of folks want to know, what about plastic utensils? Will those get recycled if they're clean?
Thank you for asking. I love this question because I've worked in some communities. I generally do education outreach on recycling and composting, and some programs consider them as recyclable. And it has always pained me to say that. In general, it's very difficult to capture small things in recycling programs, right? So we kind of described that conveyor belt before. The materials recycling facilities put the material that they collect, the tons and tons, hundreds of tons that they collect every day onto conveyor belt. And there's a series of technologies, shakers, eddy currents, magnets. There's a whole range of ways, technology and manual labor, that they utilize to sort everything out, right? Well, imagine what they care to collect: a plastic fork, a straw. These things are so small, and this thing is moving fast. It's very hard for them to capture. What comes off the end of the line is what we call residual. Everything that is residual goes to landfill. Okay, so even if you put it in the recycling bin, if it's not captured during the sorting process, it's going to go to landfill anyhow. And so I don't like to say that plastic bags and film, or sorry, that plastic cutlery is recyclable, because I think there's a very little chance that it will get recycled. I've only had one community that has insisted that they're able to get it out, and I don't even want to state which one that is because they're not in San Mateo County. So, but yeah, I think it's safe to say that it's not really recyclable. And the reason why I don't like to say it's recyclable is I don't want anybody to feel good about using it. It should go in the trash because it is a trashy thing to do, and it's totally unnecessary. Okay,
great. Okay, and then to sort of piggyback off of the hard to recycle questions, if most of the plastic and glass in the blue bin is too dirty to recycle, what happens to that?
So when I said that percentage, it's 25% of the glass that was too dirty to recycle. And part of the reason why is in a single stream recycling program, which is what the majority of our curbside programs are, at least in the Bay Area, everything goes into the same truck, as you know, right? It goes into the same cart, the truck comes, puts it in the back of the truck. In order to maximize the efficiency of that route, the materials are compacted while the truck makes its way down the road. The process of compacting glass means that it becomes small shards. And if there's any shredded paper in there, if there's any food in there, if there's any other contaminants in there, then when they get to the recycling facility, again, small things are hard to capture, right? So those itty bitty bits of glass that have now been generated, we have to somehow separate away from batteries or plastic forks or other small things, straws. In fact, most haulers that I'm aware of actually pay to get rid of glass. They don't make any money off their single stream glass. They pay to get rid of it almost like it would be a discard. There's one facility in the Bay Area that handles that, Strategic Materials. And I've toured their facility before. They might sort that upwards of 15 times, sorting it over and over and over to try to get as much glass out of it as they can. And most of that glass will probably be going to fiberglass, not necessarily back to beverage containers. So that's the thing for glass, and that's why there's such a high percentage, because a lot of it breaks in transit, and it becomes very hard to recycle. For plastics, the issue with them isn't so much of them being having the same issue as glass. They're not going to break up during the collection process. Plastic is just difficult because of how many different types of polymers that there are. So the numbers 1 through 7 indicate 1 through 6 are 6 different types of polymers. 7 is a category for other. All the other polymers, infinite number, can go into an other category. There's no way to recycle that, right? So plastic, the challenge with that becomes how do we get enough of a single type of a plastic commodity to be able to market it, right? And so it has to be a significant enough amount of the recycling material stream in order to make sense for the hauler to bring it to market. So that's the challenge with plastics.
Okay, great. And there's a good follow-up for that. Someone asked, if glass is shattered in recycling, can it still be recycled?
Yes, the problem, it's not an issue if glass is broken to recycle it. It's just a matter of being able to separate it out from other things that are not glass and from the other colors of glass. I think you may have heard me mention earlier in the presentation, optical technologies, optical sorters. Maybe I didn't mention this, but the way those work is they utilize rays of light to distinguish the flint of or the color of the glass, and then they use a puff of air to actually separate out the clear from the green from the brown. And so for those glass types, there is an improved chance that they'll actually get recycled. Again, if it's blue glass, if it's red glass, there's not going to have enough of a market share to be able to market that, and that most likely is going to get landfilled. So pick simple packaging, and if you break a bottle at home, it doesn't mean that it can't go into the trash can, or break a bottle, at your workplace, at a restaurant or something like that. It doesn't mean that you can't put that in a recycling bin. One thing I always like to mention, drinking glasses, broken wine glasses, and ceramic are not the same thing as beverage container glass. And because they have a different temperature at which they melt, those materials, if they break, should go into garbage, okay? So again, any decorative glass, automotive glass, mirrored glass, and any glass that's not really used for food or beverage, if that breaks, should go into the landfill.
Great. Okay. And it doesn't say currently, but I'm assuming this question is asking, are 3 through 7 plastics currently being recycled?
3 through 7 plastics are included as an accepted material in all of the recycling programs in San Mateo County. And you may have noticed that that was a political answer. Here's what I'll say. No, they're not. And folks will be honest with you when you ask that question. Here's why I think it's still important to put them in the recycling bin. If they're in the recycling bin and they go to a recycler, they are incentivized to find a market for those materials, right? If they simply go to landfill, there's not as much of an incentive for them to continue to find that market, right? Because anything that a recycler gets that they have to pay to get rid of becomes a cost center for them. They want to flip that. They want to flip that into be a revenue stream. So while I'm telling you that the program's accepted materials includes 3 through 7s, but we can't market those right now, one, we don't know how fast that's going to change. We hope it's faster, sooner rather than later, that changes back and that we can find a market for it. It's just currently not right now. And two, it's important that we let the recyclers know what a significant portion of the recycling stream those materials are. So I'm still recommending that those go into the recycling bin.
Great. Okay. And we're almost at time here. So I think we should end it on this final question, which I think is a good one and a complicated one. So I will let you wrap it up for us after the question, Laura. And the question is, are there any policies that make manufacturers accountable for taking back products at the end of their life, such as empty propane bottles that can be refilled, something like the old times when glass milk bottles were taken back?
That is a great question to end on, because it's a note for activism. By and large, no. There are some programs for pharmaceuticals. San Mateo County has one, Alameda County has one, and that's take-back programs for unused pharmaceuticals. That was a very, very hard-won battle where the big pharma companies made it difficult for the counties to institute any oversight over them. And as you might imagine, unused pharmaceuticals represent a huge issue for our communities. And that's exactly the case that we're talking about, right? This is something that the pharmaceutical companies are creating, may or may not being used, but then somebody downstream, one of us, right, our communities, our government, has to figure out something to do with it. So that's one case where we've seen extended producer responsibility work on things like, there are some other programs with paint, with mattresses, where we've seen some motion with that. Mattresses now should be free for drop-off. And so that's an extended producer responsibility program. There are not enough, and certainly when it comes to common everyday packaging, other than the CRB program for bottles and cans, there's really nothing. There's not enough engagement from the product manufacturer level. And I really hope, as a key takeaway, that we continue to ask the people that represent us in Sacramento that this is an important thing, that we, and we're dead. Is it no longer here? Anyhow, hopefully you're hearing me, and if not, we'll leave it at that.
We can hear
still
you.
hear you,
Yep,
Laura. Can you hear me?
good.
Keep going.
Mhm.
Okay. The whole screen was frozen on my end, so it looks like we're wrapping right in time. But yeah, so just continuing to ask our representatives for extended producer responsibility for more packaging, because that has to happen. It's a number one most important thing. All right, well, with that last question, I think I will go ahead and sign off. Thank you, everybody, for coming. This was a ton of fun. And if you have further questions, we'll send out an email and send out the slides as well. And have a good rest of your evening.